Japan's defense ministry is asking for a record-breaking $52 billion for military spending in 2024. That's a 12% increase over this year, with a large portion of that budget going to warships, missile defense, and counter-strike weapons. It's part of Japan's plan to double defense spending to 2% of the country's GDP by 2027 in reaction to perceived threats from China and North Korea. Earlier this year, Japan also announced it would deploy a missile defense unit on one of its islands just over 100 kilometers from Taiwan. For more on Japan's defense budget, our reporter Jaime Ocon spoke to Washington, D.C.-based security analyst Eleanor Shiori Hughes.
What is this motivation behind this increase in defense spending from Japan?
First of all, geographically speaking, Japan is surrounded by neighbors with little to no hesitation to exert instruments of powers in ways that are counter to Japan's security interests. And those powers are North Korea, Russia, and China. It's not a new phenomenon for China to exert its military powers in ways that are coercive, but I think a shock such as Russia's invasion of Ukraine really accelerated Japan's thinking to shift its security objectives as well as up its defense spending.
And with Japan now playing a more active role in spending more, not just on its own defense, but also working more closely with allies in the region like the United States and South Korea, what does this mean for security overall in the region? What do you think we're going to see in the next couple of years?
Well, Japan, unlike the past few, up until recently, I would say that Japan has less qualms to no longer keeping its head down. So in other words, being indifferent to these coercive behavior, whether it's from China, Russia, North Korea, or any other potential other actor in the area globally, might invite more coercion, if that makes sense. So the opportunity cost of not projecting deterrence could simply prolong the coercion that that Japan does not actually want to be prevalent in the region.
And we've seen announced a couple months before that Japan was debating about whether to deploy a missile defense system on Yonaguni Island, which is so close to Taiwan, only about 100 or so kilometers from Taiwan. How big of a factor do you think this uncertainty or this possibility of a potential conflict or even a blockade around Taiwan, how much of that is a motivating factor for Japan to up its defense spending?
I think that Taiwan, or the Taiwan Strait more broadly, as a geopolitical flashpoint and a potential site for a conflict down the line, is playing a greater role in shaping Tokyo's strategy in terms of where it wants to, what its security priorities are. In the annual defense white paper, for example, not only was Taiwan mentioned 20 times, although to be fair, part of it could have been because of like the amount of times Taiwan was mentioned in the graphics, but there was even a section that mentioned, Tokyo's intolerance for unilateral change in the status quo, which of course not only applies to Taiwan, but potentially in the East China Sea as well.
That was independent security analyst Eleanor Shiori Hughes speaking to our reporter Jaime Ocon.